Hey everybody, welcome back to Leosophy. This is the first in the installment regarding pathogens and diseases. You probably already know what sort of prompted this, which is the really bad case of influenza in the American South, and more notably, at least in terms of media coverage, the coronavirus out in China, which is quickly spreading to other parts of the globe. But this is not like a fear-mongering or conspiracy video, although we are covering that on the 13th floor next week, so I'll put a link for our podcast, and yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about next week for the 13th floor. But this is really more just talking about the overall biology behind viruses and what they are and what people can do about them. And one of the lesser things that really sort of prompted me to make a video about this is I have seen a lot of people go to doctors who are little more than drug dealers at this point, and they ask for antibiotics for their cold or flu, and they receive it, and that's bad because it helps the immune resistance of actual pathogens that are affected by antibiotics, but not the virus, because viruses, it's even in the name. It's funny, I use the word biology of a virus. It's kind of funny because antibiotic, biology, bio means life. Viruses aren't considered to be living things, which it does present a bit of a conundrum there, because obviously they're not inanimate like a stone or something, but also they're not considered an organism for a number of reasons. One, organisms are comprised of cells. They're not. They're actually smaller than just about any cell you'll ever see. In fact, really all a virus is just a protein coat with DNA in it. That's really what constitutes a virus. It's a protein coat with DNA in it. If you don't have the protein coat, what you have is a misfolded protein, which is called a prion, or sorry, if you don't have the DNA. And if you, I can't remember what the actual name of of just the floating DNA is called. Virions, I think? Something like that. Anyway, back to actually talking about what constitutes a virus, though. All they are is a protein coat, usually covered with outer shells with protein receptors, and that's sort of one of the things that sort of helps them trick the cell into being infected, is these receptors can bind to outer receptors on cells. And then what a virus does from there, 100% of viruses, by the way, are parasitic, and that's the other aspect about them, that an organism, a living thing, can reproduce. Viruses don't actually reproduce on their own. Everything they do is inherently parasitic. What they do is they inject their DNA into a cell, and because the cell's been tricked by those proteins that I mentioned, the cell begins to replicate the viral DNA and the ingredients for the viral protein coats instead of actually replicating its own DNA. And what ends up happening is this cell sort of just becomes this self-destructive virus factory. It just keeps making them and making them and making them on auto loop until it destroys the cell. It literally gets so full of viral components that it ruptures, and then those viral components, now that they're full-fledged viruses, they go out and they do the same thing to other cells, and until it provokes an immune response from the body, it's just wreaking havoc on you on a cellular level. And then when the body's immune system finally realizes what's happening, it provokes an immune response, and then we come down with the symptoms that we tend to associate with the disease. It's not actually the virus that's giving you a fever. It's actually your body is coming down with a fever to make your body inhospitable for the virus and make it more difficult for the virus to spread. Same thing with chills, which usually is more of a consequence of a fever. Same thing with the stuffy nose, stuffy sinuses, itchy sore throat. The symptoms are usually caused by your own body. There are some exceptions to this, but by and large, what we associate with actually a viral infection are actually just mechanisms that the body's employing to get rid of the virus. And that's actually where it gets dangerous when you deal with some of these scarier viruses out there, like the Spanish flu, and to a lesser extent, some people are saying that the coronavirus, I haven't seen confirmation for this though, causes what's called a cytokine storm. And a lot of people hear that and they're immediately terrified because it sounds absolutely mortifying, doesn't it? A cytokine storm. But the term was actually coined in like 1991 or 1994 or something like that. Really, what a cytokine is it's actually a kind of a cellular signal to bring in immune cells. Kind of one way I think of it is if you look at old-timey warfare, you would have like the flag carriers, and they would go to like certain areas, and then that banner would actually cause other troops to go there because that was part of their strategy. It's like, oh, one of the flag boys has gone left and the other's gone right. We're doing a phalanx formation, and then they would move accordingly. That's kind of how it works with your immune system and cytokines. So where this becomes a problem, and you see this time and time again with a lot of diseases that are fatal, is that the immune response in an attempt to save you from a very dangerous threat ultimately is what kills people. And cytokine storms are no exception. What happens is, let's say there's an infection in the lungs. This is the big one with the flu. And as a result, they call for reinforcements from the immune system to go to the lungs. And you end up with far too much of that signal, of that cytokine. What ends up happening is your lungs get actually flooded with inflammation as a response from your immune system, including, a bunch of immune cells moving to the area, and there's so much there that it interferes with the function of your lungs and you asphyxiate. That's really what causes it. It really is, in some respects, immune responses like that are fatal, including like the really bad bee allergies and stuff. It's friendly fire. It's a case where the good guys in the story are messing up and causing problems. And one of the things I wanted to point out, especially I mentioned it before, that antibiotics don't work for viruses. There are two ways that modern medicine deals with viruses. And the first, in the case of the flu, would be a combination of rest. Yeah, I mean, it's almost prehistoric, the things that you do for viruses. Get plenty of bed rest, stay hydrated. Popsicles are great for it, especially if you got a sore throat. And the other possibility is there are drugs now that can help with reducing the infection rate of a virus and reducing the symptoms. And in the case of the flu, that would be Tamiflu. Most viral diseases, though, don't actually have a drug like that, and the chief reason is because they're just not as common, and not as much research has gone into decreasing their effectiveness. Especially, I mean, you're never going to see a Tammy Ebola, because reducing the symptoms and reducing the time that you have Ebola is not going to help you. At that point, you're spitting into a tornado. It's not going to do anything. And another method is vaccines. Vaccines are when people are injected with, like, I almost said dead. See, this is where it gets like philosophically complicated, because again, we're dealing with something that's not alive, but it does things. I mean, it's not alive by our definition. I wish there was a word for like somewhere in between. But anyway, they're animate, I guess. But it's a deactivated virus, for lack of a better word. And what this does is it's kind of like when, again, I compare disease in general to warfare, because that's what it is. It's just cellular warfare. What this is like is, imagine that you've got enemy spies flying overhead taking like aerial photographs, or enemy soldiers who are at the front lines, and it's the outset of a war, right? What does the enemy army do? They shoot down that plane, and they hope to God that it doesn't actually kill the guy inside. And similarly, they capture people on the front line at the very beginning of a war. And what do to that spy, to those soldiers? They interrogate them. They want to know where the bases are. They want to know where the weapons are stashed. They want to know what the plans are. And they use that intel to fight against the enemy. That's pretty much what happens with a vaccine. You're giving your immune system, your friendly soldiers inside you, you're giving them the schematics for how to take down that virus. You're giving them the information that they need so that when a healthy, for lack of a better word, again, virus infects them, they know exactly what to do. They know exactly where to stick the knife. They know how to deal with it. And so instead of having a full-blown escalated infection, instead what they have is, something that's either reduced to the point that it's no longer a concern, or even completely symptomless. Like, case in point, by the way, this isn't like me shilling for vaccines in general. I do think that we do get way too many. And I do, there's a lot of suspicious stuff to do with it. I'm not not even going to go there right now just because it's too complicated. Maybe we should do, well, anyway, I'm not going to do a 13th floor episode on that either, probably. Anyway, but a lot of these stories I hear, like, well, I gave little Tommy a flu shot. By the way, I never get flu shots. I think they're stupid. It's from last year. It's mutated too much. It's not helping you. But anyway, I gave little Tommy a flu shot, and he had the flu for a day. It's like, well, no, he didn't. He didn't have the flu for a day. His immune system reacted like he had the flu, realized it wasn't, reverse engineered the flu, and now if he got infected with that particular strain, which he probably won't because it's from flipping last year, but if he did, they would know exactly what to do because they pretty much went through like practice military maneuvers on that virus. So that's the benefit of vaccines. I don't think that there's going to ever be a true flu vaccine because it is too diverse, it is too varied. It's a very broad term. It's not like one thing. And furthermore, I don't really think that there's going to be a vaccine for the coronavirus for the same reason. It is a very fast mutating virus from what I've seen. By the way, just so you know, the reason why it's called that is the proteins that are around it on the coat, the receptors, they sort of look like a halo or a corona, and that's why they're called that. Just in case you didn't know that, because like people are making jokes about the beer and all that, and it's led to people asking, well, why is it even called that? That's why it's called that. It looks like a little halo effect because of those little protein receptors. Trying to think. One of the most interesting viruses to me, personally, I even wrote a book with the title, are retroviruses. And that's because they actually transcribe the code as RNA backwards, which is how RNA is transcribed in humans. And the reason why that interests me is two reasons. One, it increases the rate of mutations for that because it's a more complicated process, and so there's more room for error, and errors lead to mutations. Additionally, I don't know why it evolved that way. It's one of those things where it's like, why did it do that? It seems very inefficient, and yet it does a great job. In fact, HIV is a retrovirus. Is a great example. And one of the reasons why this also interests me is generally, I had a question about that actually, whether cancer was contagious, and one of the things I brought up was that there are viruses that can cause cancers. Almost all of them tend to be retroviruses, and it's because cancers are caused by mutations, and retroviruses are more likely to cause a mutation in a healthy cell than the other kinds of viruses. It's super weird. I don't know why. Well, I do know why. I just told you why, but it's weird that it's a thing. It's one of those things that kind of baffles me that it exists at all. Yeah. Let's see. I feel like there was one other thing I was going to talk about. Retroviruses, proteins. I'm going to do a separate episode, probably really short, about prions. So I'm not even going to concern myself with that. Yeah, viruses are a weird thing. Like they almost feel alien. Like if somebody told me like, hey, there is something on this Earth that you've seen a million times and it's extraterrestrial, I would assume viruses. And that's the other thing I was going to say actually. Viruses, because they inject their DNA in cells, sometimes they'll inject it by accident. Well, if you can call it an accident, since they don't have a brain. It's not like they can make mistakes. But they'll inject a sperm or egg cell with that DNA, and instead of killing it, what happens is that DNA gets sort of placed within the genome of that egg or sperm, and then it becomes a person when that egg or sperm is fertilized or does some fertilizing. And what you end up with is junk DNA in humans. We actually have like tons of junk DNA from viruses because of this weird little accident that keeps happening over and over again in our evolution. And it's just one of those things that I also find fascinating, just to think, because everyone I'm talking to, myself included, we have virus DNA that doesn't really do anything. It's just there. It's just clutter. Yeah, that's so weird, right? But anyway, that's all I got for viruses. Like, share, subscribe, keep asking questions. Next episode's going to be bacteria. Bye.